Every morning for 14 years, Ruth Calloway made the same breakfast. 2 eggs scrambled soft, 2 slices of wheat toast cut on the diagonal, 1 cup of coffee, black, no sugar, set on the left side of the placemat, exactly where her husband's hand would reach for it without looking. She did this every single morning for 14 years. And every morning for 14 years before she sat down, she took a small laminated index card out of the front pocket of her apron, looked at it for 10 seconds and put it back. Nobody in her family ever asked what was on it. Nobody thought to ask. On a Wednesday afternoon in early October, inside a Family Feud studio in Burbank, California, with her husband and 3 grown children standing 6 feet away, and Steve Harvey leaning across a podium with a microphone and 200 strangers watching from the audience, Ruth Calloway did something she had never done in 14 years. She answered the question on the card, out loud, in front of everyone. And the answer she gave, 4 words, quiet and clear, before anyone else in her family had even lifted a hand toward the buzzer, turned what should have been the funniest moment of the day into the most honest one. And the family that had come to win a game show went home with something they had not expected. The truth, which was bigger. Family Feud, if you have never watched it, works like this. A host reads a question to 2 families. The question is always based on a survey. 100 people asked the same thing and their answers ranked by how common they were. The family that buzzes in first and gives the most popular answer wins control of the round. Win enough rounds and you go to fast money. Win fast money and you go home with a prize. The questions sound simple. Name something you find in a purse. Name something people do when they are nervous. Name a reason a person might cry at a wedding. They sound simple. They are not simple, because the answer is never what you personally think the answer is. The answer is what 100 strangers thought the answer was. And the gap between those 2 things is where comedy lives and where families find out in front of America what they actually think about things. Steve Harvey has been closing that gap for over a decade. He has hosted Family Feud through the full spectrum of human expression. He has watched a man freeze completely solid in front of the buzzer for 11 seconds before whispering, "Potato." He has watched an 8-person family collectively decide that the answer to name something you'd find in a haunted house was a friendly ghost, and then look at each other with profound confidence as the board revealed they were wrong. He has watched people give answers that were so wrong they looped back around to being right, and answers that were technically correct but somehow deeply offensive to everyone in the room. He has seen things. He has heard things. But the thing about Family Feud that the audience understands, even if they have never said it out loud, is that the game is not really about the answers. It is about the people giving them. The Calloway family from Akron, Ohio, came to the studio on a Wednesday in early October believing this completely. They had come to have fun, to win some money, to see how they did under pressure, to find out in the specific way that a game show reveals what kind of people they were when someone put a clock on them and the whole country was watching. They found out. Just not the way they expected. Ruth Calloway was 58 years old. She was 5'4", with the kind of posture that comes not from effort, but from decades of standing in a kitchen at 5:30 in the morning and deciding, without making it a decision, that the day required her to be upright and ready. She had been a home health aide for 22 years. Before that, she had worked the breakfast shift at a diner on Exchange Street in Akron for 7 years. And before that, she had been a student and a young mother and a woman who did not yet know how much she could carry. She was the kind of woman who remembered your coffee order after meeting you once, who sent birthday cards with a handwritten line inside that was specific to you, not a general wish, but something that said, "I have been paying attention to your life," who could walk into a room where something was wrong and know it before anyone said a word. Her husband, Clifford, was 62. A retired city bus driver, 29 years on Route 18, a man with wide shoulders and a laugh that arrived before his voice did, a warm, rumbling sound that you heard from the next room and knew what it meant before you heard the joke. He had been sober for 11 years, which he mentioned to anyone who asked and some people who didn't, not because he wanted sympathy, but because he believed the honest accounting of a life was more useful than a polished one. They had been married for 33 years. 3 children, Marcus, 31, the oldest, an electrician built like his father with the same early arriving laugh and the same habit of standing with his arms crossed not out of hostility, but because that was simply where his arms went when he was thinking. He had driven the family to Burbank from the airport with a confidence that suggested he knew exactly where he was going and a frequency of wrong turns that suggested otherwise. Imani, 28. A dental hygienist, precise in the way that a person becomes precise when their profession requires that they see inside people's mouths and find things the person didn't know were there. She had a gift for noticing what other people missed. In the family's pre-show briefing, she had made a list of potential survey categories and ranked them by likelihood. The list was detailed. It was also, as it turned out, entirely wrong. She was unbothered by this. And Vincent, 25, the youngest. He studied accounting and worked part-time at a sporting goods store, and he had the energy of someone who had recently had a very large cup of coffee and was hoping it was going to help him be funny on television today. It was helping. The family had applied for Family Feud because Clifford turned 62 in August, and Ruth had written the application as a birthday gift, the way you give someone a gift that you know is also a little bit for yourself. She had not told him what was on the card in her apron pocket. She had been carrying the card for 14 years. It was a 3x5 index card, laminated at the Office Depot on Market Street in Akron in October, 14 years ago. The lamination had a small bubble in the lower right corner where the plastic hadn't sealed perfectly. Ruth knew the bubble was there the way you know the chips and cracks in things you have held for a long time. She had pressed the bubble flat with her thumb approximately 10,000 times. It never stayed flat. On the card in her own handwriting were 4 words. She had written them the morning after the hardest night of her life. She had looked at them every morning since. She had not said them out loud to a single person, not to Clifford, not to her children. Not to her pastor or her best friend Yvette, or the woman she worked with for 12 years who knew things about Ruth that Ruth had not told anyone else. 4 words, 14 years, every morning, until Wednesday. The Calloways were matched against the Vargas family from Tucson, Arizona. The Vargases were quick. A mother and her 4 adult children who moved and communicated with the compressed efficiency of a family that had spent years doing things together under pressure. They were warm, loud, and fast on the buzzer. The oldest son, a compact man in a green shirt, had a reaction time that made the production staff do a small double take during the practice round. "These people are trained," Vincent whispered to Marcus during the setup. "They're just a family," Marcus said. "A trained family," Vincent said. Imani, who had been studying the Vargas family with the focused attention she normally reserved for a patient's back molars, said, "The mother is the anchor." "Watch the mother." They all looked at the Vargas mother. She was a small woman in her mid-60s with an expression of absolute serenity, the kind of serenity that belongs to someone who has long since stopped being surprised by things. "She looks like she has done this before," Clifford said. "She looks like she could do anything," Ruth said. She said it with a tone of recognition that none of her children noticed at the time. Steve Harvey came out during the warm-up, working through both families the way he always did, reading the room and the individuals inside it simultaneously, looking for the thread that would carry the next 30 minutes. He reached the Calloways and stopped at Ruth, not because he was directed to, just because Ruth was the kind of person a room rearranged itself around without her doing anything to cause it. "Ma'am," Steve said, "can I ask you something?" "You can ask me anything," Ruth said. "Whether I answer is a different matter." Steve looked at the audience. She said that like she means it. "I do mean it," Ruth said. "How long have you been married?" 33 years. 33 years, Steve pointed at Clifford. To this man," Ruth confirmed. "On purpose." The audience laughed. Clifford laughed. Steve laughed. Marcus covered his face. "On purpose," Steve said. "Okay, I respect that. I respect that completely." He leaned toward Ruth slightly. "And in 33 years, what is the one thing you have learned about being married?" Ruth considered this for exactly 2 seconds. "That a quiet woman is not always a peaceful one," she said. The laughter that followed was the loud kind, the kind that arrives fast before a person has decided how they feel. But if you had been watching closely, if you had been watching the way Imani was trained to watch, you would have noticed that Ruth said it without quite smiling. Not flat, not sad, just even. The way a person says something they have thought about for a long time and have finally decided to say. Clifford was laughing. The children were laughing. Steve was writing something invisible in the air with his finger as if the line deserved to be saved. Nobody caught the way Ruth looked at her apron pocket after she said it. She was not wearing the apron here. She was wearing a blouse the color of autumn leaves. But her hand went to the front pocket of the blouse anyway, the way it always did, before she remembered the card wasn't there. She had left it in the car. The game started. The Calloways and the Vargases went back and forth through 3 rounds with the energy and controlled chaos of 2 good families who both wanted to win and were both enjoying themselves too much to be dishonest about it. In round 1, Imani buzzed in on "name something you'd find under a teenage boy's bed" and answered "dirty socks" with the clinical confidence of someone who had done a controlled study. Number 2 answer. In round 2, Marcus buzzed in on name an excuse people use for being late and answered traffic before Steve finished the question. Number 1. He pumped his fist once, then caught himself and became a person again. Clifford played round 3 and gave bus driver when asked to name a job where you meet a lot of people. It was not on the board. He was not surprised. He looked at the board with the equanimity of a man who had been driving the same bus route for 29 years and knew that the survey was going to say something like waitress or hairdresser and was prepared to accept this without grievance. It said hairdresser. I knew it, he said. Ruth had not played yet. She had been watching. Standing with her family, passing the energy between them the way she always did at home, the touch on an arm, the small nod, the look that said, I see you, you're doing fine. The anchor of the family, the way the Vargas mother was the anchor of hers, though Ruth would not have used that word about herself. The Calloways went into the final round down by 43 points. Steve announced the category. Okay, he said. Final round. This one is worth triple points, which means for our math people in the audience it can change everything. He looked at both families. The question is, name something a wife does that she thinks her husband doesn't notice. He looked at both families. Ladies, he said, this one might be for you. And Ruth Calloway's hand shot to the buzzer before anyone else in either family had moved. The buzzer sound was loud and clean. It silenced the ambient noise of the studio the way a starting gun silences a crowd, one sharp sound, and then, attention, both families turned. Ruth had beaten everyone, both teams, not by a small margin, by the full length of a thought. Her hand was already on the buzzer while the other 7 players were still registering that a question had been asked. Steve Harvey looked at her. Mrs. Calloway, he said, you did not hesitate. No, she said, you know the answer. Yes, she said. The audience leaned forward, not because the answer was going to be funny. They leaned forward because of the way she said yes. It was not a game show yes. It was not the yes of a person who had thought of something clever. It was the yes of a person who had been holding an answer for a very long time and had just decided that this was the moment to give it. Steve noticed. He did not say anything. He just nodded once in a way that gave her the floor. Ruth stood straight. She looked at her family. Marcus, Imani, Vincent, Clifford. She looked at her husband last, and she held his eyes for a moment longer than the moment required. Then she looked at Steve. Name something a wife does that she thinks her husband doesn't notice, she said. She grieves alone. 4 words, she grieves alone. The board operator waited. The board revealed number 1 was shopping. Number 2 was crying. Number 3 was worrying. Number 4 was staying up late. Number 5 was redoing his chores. She grieves alone was not on the board. The X sound played. But nobody in the studio was listening to the X sound, because Steve Harvey had stopped moving. He was looking at Ruth, not the way a host looks at a contestant who has missed an answer. The way a person looks at another person when they have just said something real in a room full of people and the room has not caught up yet. The audience had not laughed. The audience had not made any sound. The audience was doing the thing audiences do in the 3 seconds between hearing something and understanding what they heard. And Clifford Calloway, 62 years old, 29-year bus driver, 11 years sober, 33 years married, was looking at his wife with an expression that his children had never seen on his face before. It was not confusion. It was recognition of something he had not been meant to see. Mrs. Calloway, Steve said, quietly, all the host voice gone, just the man. Can I ask what you mean by that? Ruth looked at him. She was very still. It's not on the board, she said. You should move on to the next player. I'll move on in a minute, Steve said. Right now I want to stay here if that's all right with you. The studio was holding its breath in the way that 200 people hold a breath collectively. Not a sound, not a shuffle, not a cough. The ventilation system in the ceiling, nothing else. Imani, standing 2 feet to her mother's left, was looking at her mother's hands. Ruth's hands were still at her sides. But Imani was a person who looked for what was not visible, and what was not visible right now was the card. The small laminated card her mother had carried in her apron pocket every morning for as long as Imani could remember and had never once explained. She had never asked. She was asking herself now why she had never asked. The answer was uncomfortable. Because she had not wanted to know. Because the card had always been a thing that belonged to her mother and was not offered to anyone else, and the family had understood this the way families understand the private territories of the people they love, not by being told but by feeling the edges of those territories and choosing not to press. You don't have to say anything else, Steve said to Ruth. I mean that. Ruth looked at her family one more time. Then she reached a decision. You could see it happen. Not in a dramatic way, in the quiet way that real decisions get made, which is usually without announcement, usually in the space of a single breath. 14 years ago, she said, I lost a baby. A stillness came over the studio that was different from the one before. Before, it had been the stillness of anticipation, of 200 people waiting for something to happen. This was the stillness of something having happened. of a room absorbing a truth that did not fit neatly into what anyone had expected this afternoon to be. Ruth's voice was even, not brittle, not shaking. Even the way a voice gets when a person has practiced something not by saying it out loud, but by carrying it so long that it has settled into something manageable, something she could hold without it spilling. "I was 23 weeks pregnant," she said. "It was March." The kids were, she did the math quickly, easily, the way you do math you have done 10,000 times. Marcus was 17, Imani was 14, Vincent had just turned 11. She looked at her children, three faces that were doing the same thing in three different ways. Marcus had gone very still, the way big men go still when something hits them. Imani had one hand flat on her sternum, pressed there without her seeming to know she'd done it. Vincent was looking at his mother with the expression of someone very young confronting the fact that their parents have an entire life that preceded and extends beyond being someone's parent. "We didn't tell the children," Ruth said. "We had not told them about the pregnancy yet. It was early enough that we were still deciding when to say something, and then she paused. And then there was nothing to say. Clifford had not moved. He was standing 3 feet from his wife, and he had not moved since she said the words, "She grieves alone." And his face was doing something careful and complex, the face of a man who is realizing that he knew and didn't know simultaneously, that he had seen something for 14 years and had let it be a thing he was not supposed to see. "Clifford knew," Ruth said. "We went through it together. He was there for every part of it." She looked at her husband. "But after there came a point where I could tell he needed it to be done, needed to get back to life, and I understood that. I did not hold it against him. People grieve at different speeds, and there is nothing wrong with the speed he moved at." She looked back at Steve. "But I was not done." She paused. "I have never been done." The woman in the front row, who had been trying very hard to hold her composure since the words "lost a baby" had stopped trying. "Every March," Ruth said, "I go through a few days that are harder than the rest. Every year at 23 weeks of the calendar, I feel it the way you feel a change in the weather before the weather changes. I just feel it. And I have never in 14 years said that to my husband or my children, because it felt like something that was mine to carry. Because Clifford had been so good to me in the immediate of it, and I didn't want him to think I was saying he hadn't done enough. Because the children didn't even know there was a baby to grieve. And because," she stopped. She found the truth she was looking for. "Because I was afraid that if I said it out loud, it would become something I expected them to carry with me, and I didn't want to put that on them." Steve Harvey was looking at her with the full and quiet attention of a man who has a mother and a wife and daughters, and has stood in enough rooms to know when something true and hard is being said out loud for the first time. "So instead," he said gently, "you carried it yourself." "Every morning," Ruth said. "I wrote it down the morning after we came home from the hospital. I wrote down 4 words on a card, just so it would exist somewhere, just so there was a place where it was real." She touched the front pocket of her blouse. "I've kept it with me since then. I look at it in the morning and I put it back, and I go make breakfast." Clifford made a sound. It was small, not a word. Just a sound, the sound of a man who has just understood the shape of something he has been living alongside for 14 years without fully seeing. He looked at his wife. She looked at him. And then Imani said, very quietly, because she was a person who had been trained to find what was not visible, and she had found it, and she could not let it sit, "Mama." What were the 4 words? And this was not the part of the afternoon that anyone had planned for. This was the part that arrived the way the most important moments always arrive. Sideways, through a door nobody knew was there because of a question a daughter asked in a studio in Burbank that she had been not asking for 14 years in Akron. Ruth looked at her daughter, then at Marcus, then at Vincent, then at her husband. There was a long pause, not long as in uncomfortable, long as in measured. As in the pause of a woman who has spent 14 years finding the exact distance between keeping something safe and keeping it hidden, and has just now, in this particular room, decided that the distance has closed. She was going to be Josephine, Ruth said. The words were simple. They landed the way simple words land when they carry everything. She was going to be Josephine. Marcus looked at the floor, then back up. He was breathing through his nose in the careful way of a man managing something large. Imani's hand was still flat on her chest. She pressed it harder. Vincent did not trust himself to do anything, so he stood still and let whatever was happening happen. Clifford looked like a man who had just been handed something he thought was lost. "I knew you'd named her," he said. His voice was rough at the edges, the way voices get when emotion sandpapers them. "I knew you had a name for her. You never told me what it was." "You never asked," Ruth said, not as an accusation. Simply as a fact. "I thought," Clifford stopped, started again. "I thought if you'd wanted me to know, you'd have told me, and I thought asking would make it harder on you." Ruth looked at him. "I thought the same thing," she said. "I thought asking would have made it harder on you." Steve Harvey was very still. He had both hands in his jacket pockets, and he was standing at a slight remove from the podium, the way a person stands when they are trying not to intrude on something that belongs to someone else. He said nothing, because there was nothing to say. This was not a game show moment. This was a husband and wife in front of their 3 children and 200 strangers, discovering that they had both been standing on opposite sides of the same grief for 14 years, each one protecting the other from the very conversation that would have helped them both. "Josephine," Clifford said. He said it the way you say a name you are saying for the first time, letting the syllables find where they land. "Josie," Ruth said. "I always thought she would have been a Josie." Clifford crossed the 3 feet between them. He did not say anything. He just stood next to his wife and put his hand over hers. The way you stand next to someone at a graveside. The way you stand next to someone when words are not the right tool for the moment and your presence is the only thing you have to offer and you are going to offer it completely. Ruth leaned into him slightly. Just slightly. Just the weight of a shoulder settling. But anyone in that room who had been married a long time, who had stood in a kitchen at 5:30 in the morning and understood what it meant to be known by another person, recognized what that slight lean meant. It meant, "I've been waiting to let you hold this." It meant, "Thank you for being here when I finally put it down." Marcus stepped forward. He put his hand on his mother's back, not speaking, just there. Imani took her mother's other hand. Vincent, 25 years old, who had come to a game show in Burbank to be funny on television, put his face into the space between his parents' shoulders and held on. The Calloway family stood together in the center of a game show stage and held each other. The audience was on its feet, not performing it, not deciding to stand because someone else stood. Standing because the legs carry you up when you are watching something true, and there is nothing to do with the feeling except give it height. A man in the back row was clapping very slowly, the way you clap at something that deserves more than applause. A woman 3 rows forward had both hands pressed over her mouth and was shaking her head in the way that means I did not expect to feel this today, and I am grateful that I do. Steve Harvey stood at the edge of the stage. He watched the Calloways for a long moment. He looked at his shoes once, then he looked up, and he was quiet for just a little longer. Eventually, Steve walked back. Not to the podium. He walked to the family. He stood near enough to be part of the circle without crowding it. He had done this before, stood at the edge of a real moment and understood that his job right now was not to host. It was to witness. And to say when the moment was ready for words, the thing that the moment needed said. The Calloways slowly separated, not completely. Clifford kept his hand over Ruth's. Marcus and Imani and Vincent settled back slightly but did not move far. They stayed close the way a family stays close when something has just shifted the furniture of who they are to each other. Steve looked at Ruth. "Mrs. Calloway," he said. His voice was low, warm, the voice that came from the other side of the host. "Can I say something?" "You can say anything you want," Ruth said, a trace of her usual self. The same tone from the warm-up, the same willingness. Even now she was still herself, still even, still Ruth. Steve nodded. "I have stood on this stage for a long time. I have watched people come in here and surprise me. I have watched families find out things about each other in front of an audience that they did not know going in. I have watched this show be a lot of different things for a lot of different people." He paused. "But I want to be careful here, I have never watched a woman reach into 14 years of something private, something she had been carrying alone out of love for her family, and put it down in public, because a game show asked her a question that happened to be exactly the right one." He looked at Clifford. "And I have never watched a man realize that the thing his wife had been carrying was partly his because she had been carrying it for both of them, protecting him from it. The way she probably protects him from 100 things she doesn't tell him about every single day because she is the kind of person who does that." Clifford was not trying to manage anything. He had stopped managing things approximately 4 minutes ago. Steve looked back at Ruth. "There is no shame in grief that takes time," he said. 14 years is not too long. 14 years is exactly as long as it took. And the fact that you carried it in a way that made sure the people around you could keep going, that is not weakness. That is not something to apologize for. That is an act of love so specific and so complete that most people will never see it for what it is." He stopped. "But I see it, and now your family sees it." He let that land. "Josie would have had a remarkable mother," he said. Ruth closed her eyes for a moment, one moment. Then she opened them and she looked at her husband and she said, "I want to show you the card." Clifford looked at her. "The card in your apron." "I don't have the apron here," she said. "I left the card in the car." "Then we'll get it when we get to the car," Clifford said. "You want to see it?" "Ruth." He said her name the way he had said it for 33 years, with the full familiarity of a person who has said a name so many times it has become its own word, its own complete meaning. "I have been watching you take out that card and put it back every morning for 14 years. Of course I want to see it." Ruth looked at him. "You knew about the card?" "I saw you do it the first morning," he said. I didn't know what was on it, but I knew you needed it, so I let it be yours." She looked at him for a long moment. "You're a good man," she said. "I try," he said. "You are," she said. "You are a good man." Marcus had his eyes on the middle distance, using the technique his father had never named but had modeled his whole adult life, looking at a fixed point when the feeling is too large for the face. Imani was still holding her mother's hand. Vincent, who had spent the morning trying to think of ways to be funny on television, was discovering that the most important things do not require a setup or a punchline. They just require you to be present. He was present. The audience applause was slow and sustained, the kind that is not about celebrating but about acknowledging, about saying, "We were here, we saw this. We will carry it with us when we leave." Steve Harvey stood in the middle of his stage and felt what he always felt on the rare occasions when the show became something more than a show. Grateful. Grateful that the format still had room for it. Grateful that the questions could still, occasionally, find the thing a person had been waiting to answer. Grateful that the studio lights were bright enough to make it visible and the cameras were rolling, and some of the people watching at home would recognize what they were seeing because they had a card of their own somewhere. Something they carried every morning, something that needed witnessing. The Calloways did not win the final round. They lost the buzzer race on the next question when the Vargas son in the green shirt got there first with crying. The number 2 answer that Ruth She Grieves alone had narrowly missed being. They finished the game down by 11 points, close enough that Vincent spent the drive back to the hotel working out how they might have done it differently. He stopped working it out when Marcus told him, gently, that there were some things that mattered more than the score. Vincent thought about that. He agreed. After the taping, the family spent a long time in the green room, not because anyone had arranged it, simply because nobody was ready to leave. A producer offered food. A production assistant brought water. Steve Harvey came in for a few minutes, changed out of his jacket, sat in a folding chair, and talked to Clifford about what it felt like to retire after a long career doing something you had done the same way every day. Clifford said, "You don't really retire, you just stop punching in. The person who did the job for 29 years is still in there, driving the same route." Steve Harvey said that was one of the better things he had heard in a long time. Then he said something to Ruth that she has not repeated but that she carried home with her the same way she carries the card. In her front pocket. Close. When they got to the rental car in the parking garage, Ruth asked Clifford to wait before he started the engine. She reached into the center console where she had placed the card that morning. She took it out. She unfolded it. She showed it to him. The card said she was going to be Josephine. Clifford read it. He looked at it for a long time. Then he folded it very carefully and handed it back to her. "Keep it," he said. "I will," she said, "but I wanted you to have held it." He nodded. They sat in the car for a few minutes without starting it. The parking garage was quiet. A car door slammed somewhere on another level. The fluorescent lights made everything the color of a practical afternoon. Eventually, Ruth put the card back in her pocket. Clifford started the car. They drove to the hotel and they had dinner as a family, and Marcus told a story about a wrong turn he had made on the way from the airport that was so wrong it was almost geographically impressive. And Vincent started a sentence about the buzzer timing and then stopped himself and just ate his food. And Imani sat next to her mother and did not say much but stayed close. That night, Ruth called her friend Yvette in Akron. She told her what had happened. Yvette was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Was it a relief?" Ruth thought about it. "It was like putting down something I'd been carrying so long I forgot I was carrying it," she said, "and now my arms don't know what to do." "That," Yvette said, "is exactly what relief feels like." Every March, the Calloway family now marks a quiet anniversary. No ceremony, no formal acknowledgement, just a text in a group chat, usually from Imani, who noticed things first and found words for them eventually. That says something short. Something that means, "I know what today is. I remember her. I am thinking of your mother and of you." The card is still in the apron pocket. Ruth still looks at it every morning. She still puts it back, but the words are not a secret anymore. They are shared. They are held by all of them now. She was going to be Josephine. She is still Josephine. And the woman who carried her name for 14 years in a front pocket and a quiet heart finally got to say it out loud, in the brightest room she'd ever been in, to the people she loved most. That is not a small thing. That is the whole thing. If something in this story found you, if you have something you've been carrying alone or someone you love who has, then you already know why we tell these stories. Subscribe. We find the moments that happen in the in-between, the ones that nobody planned for, the ones that matter most.